wanted to make a quick video to answer this question. We want to find the composition of the function and the domain. So we want to find, first we want to find, excuse me, f of g of x. That's our first thing we want to do, okay? And so this means we are going to plug g into the function f of x. And that means that, okay, so g of x is the square root of x, and f of x is 8x plus 1. And so if we're finding the f of g of x, we're putting g into f in place of that x. So the answer for f of g of x is going to be, keep the 8 as the coefficient, replace the x with the square root of x, and keep the plus 1. And now if we want to find the domain, we need to think about, okay, the domain of f of g of x is the domain of g for which the function f of x is also defined. And so we have g of x originally is the square root of x, right? And so we know we have to consider that we don't want that, what's under the radical, to be negative. So we want what's under the radical to be positive. So right now we're looking at g of x by itself. So based on that, we want what's under the radical to be positive or 0. Because it can equal 0, we don't have a fraction here. So then we square both sides. We want x to be bigger than or equal to 0. So this is telling us what kind of x's can go into f. So the only x's that we can put into f are the ones that are bigger than or equal to 0. All right, and so then that'll tell us, okay, well, does that affect what we can put in or get out, right? And so then we have considered our domain. For f of g of x. And now we have to consider the second part of it, right? Let's see. And so, again, this is our domain. We want to write it in interval notation because the restriction is we can only put in things that are bigger than or equal to 0. So our domain would look like zeros included go into positive infinity. This is the answer for the domain. But the question is asking us two pieces. The question asks us, what is f of g of x? So that's what we'll type in this box. Don't type in the domain here yet, right? Wait for them to ask you for that domain. What you want to type in there is what we got right here for the composed function, right? Now let's do the next part. They're going to come back and ask you g of f of x. So g of f of x. And that means we're going to plug f into g of x. So let's recall what the functions were. F of x equaled 8x plus 1. G of x equals square root of x. And so to find f of g of x, we're taking f, the whole thing, and we're going to put it in where this x is. So g of, sorry, my writing is a mess. G of f of x equals, we keep the square root, and then we replace what's underneath the radical with the 8x plus 1. So this is what you type in for that first question where they ask you what is g of f of x. You type that in, and then the next thing they'll do is they're going to spiral back around and ask you for the domain. But first they're going to ask you for the domain that we found for f of g of x. So pay attention to the order in which they're asking you the questions, okay? Because it can throw you off track. You can think, oh, I'm doing something wrong, when actually you're doing everything right. The only thing you're doing wrong is putting the answers you got in the wrong spot. That's it, okay? So let's talk about the domain of g of f of x, okay? So the domain of g of f of x, again, we have to look at our function. The domain of g of f of x is going to be the domain based on, excuse me, the domain of f. So what is allowed in f, that's also allowed in g. Okay, we have to consider what we're putting in based on what f is, and then what we can put into g. So let's go back. Let's see. The domain of f. F of x is 8x plus 1. There are no restrictions. We can put in anything we want. So anything goes. Or all real numbers we can put into f. So that means since we can put anything we want into f, that we can, this value here that we're putting in is not restricted based on what f is. So then now we have to consider the overall restrictions, kind of like big picture restrictions. And that is that our final composed function was an 8x plus 1. Well, this does have restrictions, okay? And the restrictions here would be we can't have a negative under the radical. So the restrictions here would be we want all the stuff under the radical to be bigger than or equal to 0. So that means we want 8x plus 1 to be bigger than or equal to 0. And then we would just solve by subtracting 1 from both sides. 8x is bigger than or equal to negative 1, and then divide both sides by 8. 8 bigger than or equal to negative 8. Okay, so our domain here is x is bigger than or equal to negative 1/8. So what is it called? Interval notation. Sorry, y'all, it's been a long day. Is negative 1/8 in a bracket because of that equal to bar, comma, infinity. All right, let me know if this helps or if you have more questions. I am happy to answer.